sometimes we get bogged down so far, you guys get to the point where you're like, okay, can we move on? And that's hard for me to do in the Bible because, studying the Bible and understanding the Bible. But you can take big chunks. And that's what story time's for. How can we move forward quickly but not forget what it is that we need to know? So if you'll go on through, this is the Kings series, Kings of Israel. We're talking about David right now. Go to the next one. So we're talking about King David, and the first part of King David's life was very hectic, running from Saul, becoming king, going to Jerusalem, the things he did in Jerusalem, bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Those were all good things in David's life. Go to the next slide for me. So, God decides, has a plan. David doesn't understand that plan. You see, back when he brought the Ark of the Covenant, he thought he was done with fighting. He thought it was over, so I'm going to bring the Ark of the Covenant and I want to build a big temple and all. And God's going, no, not yet. We're not ready for this time that we need, and you don't have the resources you have yet. You're not done, David. You're a warrior. That's who you are, David. You're a warrior. And so in his warring, God gave him conquest over Edom, Amalek, the Philistines, Moab, Zobah, the Amorites, and the Syrians, and especially the Sumerians of Damascus. And why that's important is Damascus was kind of, before David's time, the ruler over a whole area. When you got in trouble, you called the Syrians of Damascus to come help you. Okay? So David defeats the Syrians. And David literally puts garrisons in Damascus, which was the big capital at that time. So David's had all these wars, and he has been successful, and God has blessed him everywhere he goes. David now is back in Jerusalem. And sometimes we get so busy in doing, and we get a little bit of a break, and we get a little bit idle. And what happens when we get idle? That's when good things and bad things can happen. I've had a long summer break. A lot of good things have happened during that summer break, and some things that haven't been so good. My knee, over summer break. So good things and bad things that happen during that idle or that rest time. So let's go to some good things first that David did. Go to the next slide for me. David was knit with Jonathan, Saul's son. They were best friends. They were tight. They were close. It killed David when Jonathan died with Saul in the battle against the Philistines. But David made a promise. If you'll save my life, we have a covenant. You're not going to kill my children, and I'm not going to kill your children. And I'll take care of your family, and you take care of my family. I have people that are my friends, and I'm that way with them. I'll take care of your family. If something happens, you take care of my family. Well, that's kind of the closeness Jonathan had. When he died and all the family died, everybody thought there was nobody left. David calls in and he says, okay, is there anybody left of the house of Saul? Is there anybody left? Is everybody dead? Oh, wait a minute. There is one? Who is this? So he finds Mephibosheth when he was a child, and they had killed the king. His nurse was running away from him as an infant baby and stumbled and fall, and the child hit the ground, and it broke both of his legs, and the child was lame. And he grew up that way. He grew up in hiding for fear that David was going to come and wipe out the rest of the house of Saul. But that wasn't David's intentions. David says, go find him and bring him to me. And they went and found him, and he brings him, and he falls before David, and he says, I and my house are just a dead dog. And David says, no, I love you as I love your father. So everything that belonged to Saul, all his property, his houses, his castles, everything that belonged to Saul, I give to you. Not only do I do that, but this was Saul's servant and all his sons and all his people that work with him. I give you them to take care of all your property. But you, Mephibosheth, will never leave my sight. I am going to keep you right here at the king's table. You're going to eat with me as if you were one of my own sons. And from that day forward, Mephibosheth lived in the castle with David and ate at the table next to David. Whatever David got, he got equal. That's honoring a friend. That's a good friend. You can't help your friend anymore, but you can help your friend's family. Go to the next slide, please. Now, David has been a good king, fought many battles, done many good things for good people, has stumbled along the way, but now he is at leisure in the palace, and when you're at leisure, that's when bad things can happen. Here goes. I'm going to go through this quickly. But David's in the palace, and he's got leisure. He sent the army out to fight. He said, y'all go out and fight. You get close to winning the battle, give me a call, I'll come be with you. But he's hanging around in the palace. And he looks out his window, across the way to another rooftop, and here's a woman taking a bath. And David watches her. And used to be a saying, my pastor said this, he says, if I'm driving down the road, my training pastor, so if I'm driving down the road, he says, I have this thing for Corvettes. He says, if I look over and see a Corvette, and I get to staring at it as I drive, if I'm not watching out, my car will start drifting over towards that. I'm pulled towards that vet, and I have to correct myself. David's eyes got pulled towards something he shouldn't have been looking at because it was another man's wife. Did that stop the king? He's the king. What are we hearing here? Pride. I'm the king. I can do anything. So what does he do? He sends the servants over and gets her and brings the woman into his house. Shows her the palace and everything. She probably had big eyes and all. And then David spends some quality time with her. And shortly later she comes to him and says, David, I'm going to have a baby. David doesn't know what to do. She's a married woman. He's the king. So he calls the servant, Uriah, calls the servant up and he says, I want you to come spend time here in the palace, and gets him drunk and tries to convince him to go down to his house. Sneaky, right? It don't happen. Guy sleeps out on the steps of the palace. Next day, David calls him, why didn't you go down and wash your feet, spend time at your house? And he goes, Joab is in the field fighting, and the ark is out here in the tent, and I'm going to go down to my house and spend time with my wife? He says, that just wouldn't be right. I can't do that. So David sends him back out to the battle and sends a note with him. Can you imagine this? Somebody sending a note with you, and you think I'm being the messenger, and you go hand the note to the head of the captain, and he says, go back to your troops, and he opens up the note and it says, I want you to take this guy, I want you to put him in the very front of the battle, right next to the wall. Okay, so he made him the lead. What happens? He gets killed. News gets back to David. He's dead. David brings a woman in his house and says, okay, you're a widow now. I'm marrying you. Thinks everything's okay. Then Nathan the prophet comes in one day and says, David, I need your help with something. He says, what do you need help with? Well, there's this rich man. And he had a traveler come in and stay with him. And the rich man had many, many flocks. But he had a poor servant. And that poor servant had neither son nor daughter. All he had was one little ewe lamb that he had raised up and fed himself by his hand. It slept with him in his bed. And that rich man went and took that poor man's lamb and killed it and dressed it and fed it to the visitors that was visiting with him. David gets angry and he says, I don't know who that man is, but he will die for doing that. And the prophet looks at him and says, you're that man. You're that man. You took this poor man's wife and then sent him out and used the other army to kill him so you could have his wife. Well, David falls down and he says, I'm guilty. The prophet says, David, you still got things to do. The Lord still needs you. The Lord has set aside your sin. So he's going to set aside this sin, but it ain't going to happen for free. Two things. That child that you made is not going to survive. It's going to die. And two, from your own family, the sword will never leave your house. And the things that you did in secret will be done on the rooftop in front of all Israel to you. From that moment, the child fell sick. And David went and fell in front of the Lord. And he cried for that child. And if they tried to bring him out of laying in front of the Lord, he wouldn't have it, he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink. He laid there for days praying for the child, hoping the Lord would change his mind. Didn't work. Child died. The servants were afraid to tell David, look what he has done when the child was sick. If we tell him the child's dead, he might hurt himself. David heard him talking and whispering in the background. David says, is the child dead? Yes, King, the child is dead. David got up, changed his clothes, washed himself, anointed his head, sat down and ate something, and went in and prayed to the Lord. And thanked the Lord. And the servant said, what's this? You cry and you lay on the ground for a sick child, and now the child's dead? You wash yourself and eat and go to the Lord? David said, there'll come a time I will go to where that child is, but that child is not returning to me. Well, of course, the mother was just distraught over the whole thing. David went back with her. He's her wife now. And the Lord gave her another child. From this evil incident that David did, the world was blessed because that child's name was Solomon. Solomon became the next king. And God used Solomon greatly. But how about the other part of the story? Not only was the child going to die, but also this sword and this evil is going to stay in your house from now on. Many years later, his own son rose up against him and he had to flee. And his son wanted to make sure that everybody knew. Absalom says, I'm now the king, he's not king, and to prove it to you, David did. Everybody understand the difference? I've told you the difference between a concubine and a wife, right? Okay, in olden days, a concubine is not royalty, where a wife is from royalty. Okay, his son took all his concubines, made a tent on top of the palace in front of all of Israel, and went in there and laid with all David's concubines. And all Israel saw it happen. Just because you think you get away with something doesn't mean you get away with it. What David did back then haunted him throughout his life for the rest of his life. He paid for it. He paid for it with his child. Absalom ended up after that, he died. Okay, he lost his life. David was disgraced in front of all of Israel over it. Okay? We have to protect our leisure time. And don't let our eyes and our minds stray and get so comfortable that pride sets in. And what happens to David could happen to anybody. But you see how it followed him through his life? Okay, go to the next slide. Then comes David's worst thing he ever did. It's called a census. Our government does a census every so many years where they count our people in our country. But Israel was commanded not to do that. The king did not need to be so prideful. He had to know how many, in this case, army men he had. But he couldn't stand it. Go to the next slide. And again, hear that? Not once, because God was angry about what he did with Bathsheba. But here we go again. The anger of the Lord arose against Israel, and he moved David against them, saying, "Go number the people of Judah." Okay? Now that word there in the statement means Satan put it into his heart. Okay? Well, Satan can't put things in our heart, by the way. Okay? That's not Satan's job. Satan, let me give you another thing. Satan can't read your mind. He watches you. And he sees what things that you are drawn towards. He saw David's pride, and David's pride in his armies, and how he had taken chariots from the head of Gezer and brought them back to his own place. And he used that with David to help him decide to do this great evil. Go number Israel and Judah. In this, in Chronicles, it says the armies of Israel and Judah. He didn't care about the women and the children and all that stuff, and the farmers. He wanted to know how many army men he had. So the king said to Joab, commander of the army, who was with him, "Go throughout all the tribes of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, and count the people, so that I might know the number of the people." And Joab said to the king, "Now may the Lord your God add to the people 100 times more than they are. And may the eyes of the Lord the king see it. But why does my Lord the king desire such a thing?" What's the purpose behind this? Pride. That's all it was pride. Nevertheless, the king's word prevailed against Joab and against the captains of the army. Therefore Joab and the captains of the army went out from the presence of the king to count the people of Israel. And they crossed over Jordan and camped Aroth on the right side of the town, which is in the midst of the ravine of Gad towards Jazer. Then they came to Galilee and to the land of Tauti Hadish. It's hard to say those. And they came to Dan Jan and around to Sidon. And it goes on to all the places that they visited. And they counted how many men in each tribe were men of war that could hold a spear or hold a sword or draw a bow. When they had gone through all the land, they came to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days. Can you imagine this? So here's the captains of the army having to spend 9 months and 20 days wandering throughout Israel, calling in every one of the different tribes and counting the number of men that could draw arms. Then Joab gave the sum of the number of the people to the king, and there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men who drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000 men. Now here it comes. Next slide for me. And David's heart condemned him. David finally realized what he was doing was pride, and it was wrong, and it condemned. Have you ever been condemned at heart? You know, you did something, you thought it was going to be a good thing, but it wasn't really the right thing, but you just had to have something or know something or get something that you didn't really need, but you just wanted it really bad. And it was just pride. So David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done, but now I pray, O Lord, take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. Now when David arose in the morning, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying. Okay, so David, what did he do? Once again, when did God call David a man after my own heart? It's because when David did wrong, he was repentant and he went and he fell before the Lord. That was the failure of Saul. He didn't repent of what he did. David repented in every case. Go tell David, thus says the Lord, I offer you 3 things. Choose one of them for yourself, that I may do it to you. Sin has consequences. Sin has consequences. God forgives you the sin, but sin has consequences. An alcoholic may be forgiven of his alcoholism and for the things he did while he's an alcoholic, but that liver doesn't just heal itself. And he may still die from what he did. The drug addict may be redeemed, may become a Christian. I have known several good evangelists that were drug addicts, and they were cleaned up from their drug addict. And they went on to evangelize many people, but their body was still broken from the years of being into the drugs. And that didn't go away. There are consequences from sin. David's fixing to get us his consequence. So Gad came to David and told him, and he said to him, shall 7 years of famine come to you in your land? Or you flee 3 months before your enemy while they pursue you? Or shall there be 3 days of plague in your land? Wow. Imagine those are your choices. One of these are going to happen to you, and you have to decide what's going to happen to Israel. Now consider and see what answer I shall take back to him who sent me, God. And David said to Gad, I'm in a great distress. I can't make a decision. Have you ever had bad things, and you have to decide which one you're going to take? Okay? And you just can't make up your mind. So David decides, please let us fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great, but do not let me fall into the hands of man. The other 2 choices was something that was going to happen, that was going to be a long-term thing. David says, let me just fall in the hands of the Lord. Whatever the Lord wants to do to me, I'll take whatever my punishment is. So the Lord sent a plague upon Israel from the morning until the appointed time, from Dan to Beersheba. 70,000 people, men of the people died. Think about that. 70,000. And when the angel stretched out his hand over Jerusalem to destroy it, okay, now this is in Kings and Chronicle, it says, when he stood over Jerusalem with his sword in his hand to strike Jerusalem. Remember, there's more than one telling of this story. The Lord relented from his destruction and said to the angel who was destroying the people, it is enough. Now restrain your hand. So after 70,000 people, starting in the north, working all the way down till he got to Jerusalem. So in the northern kingdom, 70,000 people had died. What was in the southern kingdom? Okay? That's David's tribe and Saul's tribe. Benjamin, right? Judah and Benjamin was in the south. All the other tribes were in the north. And that whole northern section, 70,000 people died. He stopped at Jerusalem before Jerusalem was destroyed. It is enough. And the angels of the Lord was by the threshing floor. We most know as Ornan the Jebusite, but they use his other name here. Okay? When David spoke to the Lord, then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel. David saw the angel standing there with the sword, by the way. Imagine looking up above the city, and here's an angel tall enough with a sword that it can smite the whole city. Surely I have sinned, and I have done wickedly. But these sheep, these people, what have they done? Let your hand, I pray, be on me and against my father's house. Next. Then Gad came that day to David and said, "Go up and erect an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of," we're going to use his real name, Ornan the Jebusite. So David, according to the word of Gad, went up as the Lord commanded. So he told him, go up there and build an altar. Now, there's some very significant things about this altar. Go back to the slide for me. Okay? This is on the Mount Moriah. This is the threshing floor of Ornan. And down in the corner, you'll see a little picture. One day, that is where the temple will stand. And that is the area where the temple, Solomon's temple, was built. So David, according to the word of Gad, went up as the Lord commanded, and Ornan looked and saw the king and the servants coming towards him. And Ornan went out and bowed before the king with his face to the ground. And Ornan said, "Why is my lord the king come to his servant?" And David said to him, "To buy the threshing floor from you and to build an altar to the Lord, that the plague may be withdrawn from the people." Now Ornan said to David, "Let the Lord my king take it and offer up whatever seems good to him. Look, here's some oxen, here's my cows right here for burnt sacrifice. The threshing instruments, what we use to grind the wheat, you can use that to burn. And the yokes and the oxen for the wood. All these King Ornan has given to the king." And Ornan said to the king, "May the Lord your God accept you." Then the king said to him, "No, but I will surely buy it from you at a price. Nor will I offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God with that which cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor, and here's a thing that we see, and the oxen for 50 shekels of gold, of silver. Okay. In another place, there's a second price to this. I guess it's what he had on him to give him right then. But he also got 600 talents of gold. And David built, that was from Chronicles, by the way. Remember, I'm relating the story here to you from Kings, but also the same story is repeated from a different historian in Chronicles. And David built an altar there to the Lord, and burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord heeded the prayers for the land, and the plague was withdrawn from Israel. Folks, we all make bad choices in our life. Every one of us, we make bad choices from now and then in our life. And God will forgive us from every one of the bad choices that we make. But that doesn't mean He's going to take away the consequences for those bad decisions. I just had to have, there was a car. I just had to have that car. Just had to have it. Did I need it? No. But I was a kid at the time, and I had to have that car. God did not draw me to buy it. It was just pride. It was red. It was fast. And I had to have it. Not only did I have to have it, but it had a sister car just like it. And I had to have both of them. And I took them with me to Pensacola, Florida. Consequences. One of them got stolen off the base. Caused me a whole bunch of problems and everything else because I'd left it at the hobby shop and all this stuff. The second one, my brother took out and destroyed it. Okay? Now, in his mind, because the insurance company paid for it, he did me a favor wrecking my car. What he didn't get is the fact that at 19 years old, my insurance went through the roof. Okay? But I had to have those cars. Did I need them? Did I need two? No, I did not need two Plymouth Barracudas. That was not a necessity. That was a pride thing. I have two Cudas, not just one. Just because you make bad decisions doesn't mean the Lord won't forgive you. But there are still consequences to the things that you do that you shouldn't do in all your life. I pray that you will realize those things that you do and bring them to the Lord. What had David not followed what the Lord told him to do and not asked forgiveness of the Lord? How much worse could this be? Living and sticking with sin over time makes things worse and makes judgment harsher. Keep your accounts short with the Lord. What do I mean by that? I mean, if something happens now, don't wait till tonight or tomorrow or your prayer time or anything to bring it to the Lord. When you make a mistake, stop right then and say, Lord, I just messed up. I don't know why I was angry over here. I don't know why I did this. I don't know why I said that. I don't know why I had to have that. But I was wrong, Lord. Forgive me for that. Right then. Because what can happen? All of a sudden things aren't going good for you and you don't know why. You're having a hard time. Your daily life is just stumbling around and you're trying to figure out and you're scratching your head. So you finally get around to your prayer time. And then the Lord brings back. Remember what you did 3 days ago? Yeah. That you didn't ask for forgiveness for? Things ain't been going so good. And you have to get it right with the Lord? Don't wait. Why would you go through suffering when you don't need to? Keep your account short, Lord. Father, thank you for all that you've done in these wonderful stories and how they teach us